The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of Ravencrest Palace as Queen Consort Isabella strode through the corridors with determined purpose. Her silk gown rustled against the polished stone, each step echoing her growing frustration with the subtle resistance she had been encountering from the palace staff. 6 months had passed since her marriage to King Edmund, and despite her new title, she felt the weight of unspoken challenges to her authority at every turn. Isabella paused before the ornate mirror in the eastern hallway, adjusting the sapphire tiara that had belonged to the previous queen. The reflection staring back at her showed a woman of 35, with sharp green eyes and auburn hair that caught the morning light. She had worked too hard to reach this position to allow anyone to undermine her now. The daughter of a minor noble family, Isabella had climbed the social ladder through wit, charm, and calculated alliances. She would not be dismissed by servants or guards who still mourned the beloved former queen. The first sign of trouble had come during her attempt to reorganize the palace staff. Isabella wanted to modernize the ancient protocols and establish her own trusted circle of advisors. However, she had met with polite but firm resistance from the head butler, Lord Ashworth, who claimed that certain traditions could not be altered without the king's direct approval. When she had approached Edmund about the matter, he had been distracted by affairs of state and suggested she work within the existing system for now. Today would be different. Isabella had decided to assert her authority directly with the Royal Guard, the elite unit responsible for protecting the palace and its inhabitants. These men and women had sworn loyalty to the crown and by extension to her as queen consort. If she could gain their respect and obedience, the rest of the staff would surely follow. Captain Marcus Thornfield stood at attention in the guard's training courtyard, his weathered face betraying no emotion as he watched his soldiers practice their formations. At 42, he had served the royal family for over 20 years, rising through the ranks during the reign of the beloved Queen Lydia, Edmund's first wife. The soldiers under his command respected him not just for his tactical brilliance, but for his unwavering loyalty to the crown and his genuine care for their welfare. When the Queen Consort's messenger arrived requesting an immediate audience with the captain, Marcus felt a familiar tension settle in his shoulders. He had been expecting this confrontation for weeks. The new queen had been making inquiries about guard rotations, questioning long-established security protocols, and even suggesting changes to the ancient ceremonies that the guard had performed for centuries. Marcus dismissed his men and made his way to the queen's private reception room, located in the palace's newer wing. The room reflected Isabella's taste for opulence, with golden silk wallpaper, crystal chandeliers, and furniture imported from the continental kingdoms. It was a stark contrast to the simple elegance that Queen Lydia had preferred, and Marcus couldn't help but notice the difference. Isabella rose from her chair as he entered, her posture regal and commanding. She had chosen to wear the crown jewels for this meeting, a clear signal of the authority she intended to wield. The morning light streaming through the tall windows created an almost theatrical effect, highlighting the precious stones and casting her in an aura of power. "Captain Thornfield," she began, her voice carrying the crisp accent of the northern provinces, "I have called you here today to discuss some necessary changes to the Royal Guard's operations. As Queen Consort, I believe it is time to modernize our security arrangements and ensure they align with contemporary needs." Marcus bowed respectfully but remained silent, his expression carefully neutral. Years of military training and court service had taught him the value of listening before speaking, especially in delicate political situations. Isabella began to pace, her hands clasped behind her back in a gesture that reminded Marcus uncomfortably of a general addressing troops before battle. "First," she continued, "I want to implement new rotation schedules that will place my personally recommended guards in key positions throughout the palace. These individuals have been thoroughly vetted and possess the skills necessary to protect the royal family in our changing times." The captain's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The current guard rotations had been carefully designed over decades to ensure maximum security while maintaining the trust and morale of the entire unit. Introducing favoritism or political appointments would undermine the very foundation of the guard's effectiveness. Second, Isabella pressed on, seemingly oblivious to Marcus's growing tension, "I want to establish new protocols for who may have access to the royal quarters. Too many people currently hold keys and clearances that were granted under the previous administration. We must tighten security and ensure that only those loyal to the current regime have intimate access to the royal family. Marcus's mind raced as he processed the implications of her words. The previous administration she referred to was not a political government, but the era of Queen Lydia, a woman universally beloved by the people and deeply respected by every member of the royal guard. To suggest that those who served her faithfully might not be loyal to the crown was not just insulting, it was dangerous. Furthermore, Isabella continued, now standing directly in front of the captain, her green eyes flashing with determination, I want to review the personnel files of every guard currently serving in the palace. Anyone whose loyalty might be questioned should be transferred to exterior duties or dismissed entirely. The crown cannot afford to maintain sentiment when security is at stake. The silence that followed her pronouncement seemed to stretch endlessly. Marcus could hear the distant sounds of the city beyond the palace walls, the calls of merchants and the clatter of carriages. But within the opulent reception room, the air felt thick with tension. When Marcus finally spoke, his voice was measured and respectful, but there was an underlying steel that reflected his decades of military service. Your Majesty, he began, choosing his words with careful precision, the Royal Guard has served this crown faithfully through 5 monarchs and countless challenges. Our protocols and personnel have been tested by time and proven effective through wars, rebellions, and political upheavals. Isabella's eyes narrowed slightly, sensing resistance in his tone despite the formal courtesy of his words. The men and women under my command, Marcus continued, have sworn sacred oaths, not just to protect the crown, but to serve with honor and integrity. They have proven their loyalty through deed, not through political appointment or personal recommendation. To question their dedication based on when they began their service would be both unjust and unwise. The queen consort's face flushed slightly, her carefully composed mask beginning to slip. She had expected compliance, not a lecture on military tradition from a subordinate. Captain Thornfield, she said, her voice taking on a sharper edge, I am not questioning their past service. I am ensuring the security of the future. Times change, threats evolve, and we must adapt accordingly. Surely you understand the necessity of having guards whose primary loyalty lies with the current royal family. Marcus met her gaze steadily, his weathered face showing no sign of backing down. Your Majesty, every member of the Royal Guard has sworn the same oath to protect the crown, the realm, and the people. That oath transcends individual monarchs or consorts. It is to the institution itself which provides stability even as those who wear the crown may change. The words hung in the air like a challenge, though Marcus had delivered them with perfect military courtesy. Isabella realized that this conversation was not proceeding as she had planned. She had expected either immediate compliance or easily dismissed objections. Instead, she found herself facing a man whose quiet conviction and obvious expertise made her feel suddenly uncertain. You speak of tradition, Captain, she said, attempting to regain control of the conversation. But tradition without adaptation leads to stagnation. I am not asking you to abandon your principles. I am asking you to recognize that new leadership requires new approaches. Marcus nodded slowly, as if considering her words carefully. Your Majesty raises valid points about adaptation. However, in my experience, the most effective changes are those that build upon proven foundations rather than replacing them entirely. Perhaps we might discuss specific concerns about current security arrangements. I would welcome the opportunity to address any weaknesses you have identified. Isabella felt a flash of irritation at his diplomatic deflection. She had come here to issue orders, not to engage in negotiations with a subordinate. Her fingers drummed against her silk skirt as she considered her next approach. Captain, she said finally, her voice carrying a note of steel, I appreciate your perspective, but I must insist that you understand your position. I am the Queen Consort, and these changes will be implemented. Your role is to ensure they are carried out efficiently and effectively, not to debate their merits. The moment the words left her lips, Isabella realized she had made a tactical error. Marcus's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his bearing, a subtle straightening of his shoulders, a fractional tightening around his eyes. She had challenged not just his judgment, but his honor and that of his guards. Your Majesty, Marcus replied, his voice remaining respectfully calm despite the insult implicit in her dismissal of his expertise. I serve at the pleasure of the crown and follow all lawful orders. However, as captain of the Royal Guard, I also bear responsibility for the safety of the royal family and the integrity of our security systems. Any changes to established protocols must be carefully evaluated to ensure they do not compromise these primary objectives. Isabella felt her carefully planned assertion of authority beginning to unravel. This was not the simple demonstration of power she had envisioned. Instead, she found herself locked in a battle of wills with a man whose quiet competence made her feel like an amateur playing at politics. The tension in the room was interrupted by a soft knock at the door. Isabella's personal secretary, a nervous young woman named Sarah, peered into the room with obvious reluctance. "Your Majesty," Sarah said quietly. "Forgive the interruption, but His Majesty the King has requested your presence in the throne room. There is an urgent matter requiring your attention." Isabella felt both relief and frustration at the interruption. She needed time to regroup and consider her strategy, but she also hated leaving this confrontation unresolved. Marcus, meanwhile, seemed perfectly content to let the matter rest for now. "Captain Thornfield," Isabella said, drawing herself up to her full height, "we will continue this discussion tomorrow morning. I trust you will use the intervening time to consider the points I have raised and prepare to implement the necessary changes." "Your Majesty, I will give your proposals the careful consideration they deserve. Good day." As Isabella swept from the room, her silk gown rustling with each determined step, she couldn't shake the feeling that the confrontation had not gone according to plan. Marcus watched her go, his expression thoughtful. He had served the crown long enough to recognize political maneuvering when he saw it, but he also understood that the Queen Consort's actions, however misguided, were driven by her genuine desire to establish her authority in a difficult position. The evening found Marcus in his private quarters, a modest but comfortable suite in the guard's wing of the palace. The walls were decorated with commendations and weapons from his years of service, and a portrait of the late Queen Lydia held a place of honor on his desk. As he reviewed the duty rosters and security reports, his mind kept returning to the morning's confrontation. He understood Isabella's position better than she might realize. Coming into an established court, as an outsider, married to a king who still mourned his beloved first wife, she faced challenges that would test anyone's resolve. The staff, the nobility, and even some members of the royal family continued to compare her unfavorably to Queen Lydia, whose memory had taken on an almost saintly quality in the months following her death. However, understanding her motivations didn't make her proposed changes any less problematic. The Royal Guard's strength came from its unity, its traditions, and the mutual trust between its members. Introducing political considerations into personnel decisions would poison that well of trust and ultimately make everyone less safe. Marcus pulled out a sheet of parchment and began to write, carefully choosing his words as he composed a report for King Edmund. As captain of the Royal Guard, he had both the right and the responsibility to inform the king of any developments that might affect palace security. The Queen Consort's demands certainly fell into that category. As he wrote, Marcus reflected on the delicate balance required in his position. He served the crown, which meant serving both the king and Queen Consort, but his ultimate loyalty was to the institution of the monarchy itself. Sometimes that meant protecting the crown from well-intentioned but misguided actions by those who wore it. The next morning would bring another confrontation, but Marcus felt confident in his position. He had spent his career building relationships based on trust and competence, and he would not allow political expedience to undermine either. The Royal Guard had weathered many storms over the centuries, and it would weather this one as well, provided its leaders remained true to their principles. Meanwhile, in her private chambers, Isabella stared out at the palace gardens, her mind racing with plans and contingencies. She had underestimated Captain Thornfield, but she would not make that mistake again. Tomorrow's meeting would be different. She would come prepared with specific examples of security concerns and armed with the authority of her position as Queen Consort. The game of palace politics was far from over, and Isabella was determined to emerge victorious. After all, she had not climbed from minor nobility to the throne only to be thwarted by a stubborn guard captain, no matter how respected he might be. The crown was hers now, and she intended to wield its power effectively, regardless of who stood in her way. The dawn light filtered through the stained glass windows of King Edmund's private study, casting colorful patterns across the ancient oak desk where he sat reading Captain Thornfield's carefully worded report. The king's weathered face showed the strain of recent months, deep lines etched around his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and difficult decisions. At 53, Edmund carried the weight of both crown and personal loss with a dignity that had earned him the respect of his subjects, but the burden was becoming increasingly visible. Edmund set down the parchment and rubbed his temples, feeling the familiar ache that had plagued him since Lydia's death 18 months ago. The report detailed Isabella's demands regarding the royal guard, but reading between Marcus's diplomatic language, the king could sense the deeper tensions brewing within his own palace. He had hoped that marriage to Isabella would bring stability to both his personal life and his reign, but instead, it seemed to have introduced new complications he had not anticipated. A soft knock interrupted his brooding. "Enter," he called, and was surprised to see Isabella herself step into the room. Already dressed in an elaborate gown of deep purple velvet, her hair arranged in an intricate style that must have taken her maids hours to perfect, she carried herself with the poise of someone preparing for battle, and Edmund felt his heart sink as he recognized the determined set of her jaw. "My dear," Isabella said, gliding across the room to place a gentle kiss on his forehead. "I hope you slept well. I wanted to speak with you before the morning's appointments begin." Edmund gestured to the chair across from his desk, noting how Isabella's eyes briefly flicked to the report before meeting his gaze. "Of course. What's troubling you?" Isabella settled herself gracefully, her hands folded in her lap, in a picture of perfect composure that didn't quite mask the tension radiating from her shoulders. "It's about Captain Thornfield and the Royal Guard. I'm concerned that our security arrangements have become outdated and potentially compromised. Yesterday's meeting with the captain only confirmed my suspicions." The king leaned back in his chair, choosing his words carefully. "Marcus has served this family faithfully for 2 decades. His judgment in matters of security has always been sound. What specific concerns do you have?" "Edmund," Isabella said, her voice taking on the reasonable tone she used when she wanted to appear rational and measured, "I understand your loyalty to long-serving staff, but we must consider the current situation objectively. The palace is full of people whose primary allegiance was to your first wife. While I don't question their past service, I believe it's prudent to ensure that those closest to us are committed to our current reign." Edmund felt a flash of irritation at the implication that loyalty to Lydia somehow made someone disloyal to him. "Isabella, the people who served Lydia are the same people who have served the crown for years. Their loyalty is to the institution, not to individuals." "But that's exactly my point," Isabella pressed, leaning forward slightly. "The institution has evolved. We represent a new chapter, and our security should reflect that reality. I'm not suggesting we dismiss everyone, merely that we review and reorganize to ensure optimal protection and efficiency." The king studied his wife's face, noting the careful way she presented her arguments. Isabella was intelligent and politically astute, qualities that had initially attracted him to her. However, he was beginning to realize that her ambitions sometimes exceeded her understanding of the delicate balances required in governing. "What exactly did you propose to Marcus?" Edmund asked, though he suspected he already knew from reading the captain's report. Isabella's eyes brightened, mistaking his question for interest rather than concern. "I suggested implementing new rotation schedules to place recommended guards in key positions, reviewing access protocols to tighten security around the royal quarters, and conducting a comprehensive evaluation of all current personnel to ensure their loyalty is beyond question." Edmund was quiet for a long moment, processing not just her words, but the tone in which she delivered them. There was an underlying assumption in Isabella's proposals that the current arrangements were somehow inadequate or suspicious, an assumption that troubled him deeply. "Isabella," he said finally, "these are significant changes you're proposing. The Royal Guard's current structure has proven effective through numerous challenges. What specific security threats have you identified that require such extensive modifications?" Isabella felt a momentary uncertainty as she realized she didn't have concrete examples to support her concerns. Her motivations were more political than security-related, but she couldn't admit that to Edmund. "It's not about specific threats, darling. It's about proactive measures to prevent potential problems." Surely you agree that having guards whose loyalty is unquestionable is preferable to maintaining arrangements based solely on tradition. The king's expression grew more serious. The loyalty of the royal guard has never been in question. These men and women have risked their lives for this family repeatedly. To suggest that their service is somehow suspect because they began it during Lydia's lifetime is both unfair and unwise. Isabella felt her carefully constructed composure beginning to crack. This conversation was not proceeding as she had hoped, and she sensed that Edmund's sympathies lay more with his guards than with his wife's concerns. "Edmund," she said, her voice carrying a note of frustration. "I'm not questioning their past service. I'm looking toward our future security needs. As Queen Consort, surely I have the right to ensure that our protection arrangements meet my standards." "Of course you do," Edmund replied, but his tone was measured rather than reassuring. "However, major changes to palace security require careful consideration and my approval. The Royal Guard reports to me directly, and any modifications to their structure or personnel must be evaluated in the context of our overall safety and the stability of the realm." Isabella felt a surge of anger at what she perceived as her husband's dismissal of her authority. "I see. So I am Queen Consort in name only? My concerns are to be subordinated to the preferences of guards and servants?" Edmund's expression softened as he recognized the pain behind her anger. "Isabella, that's not what I'm saying. Your position carries significant authority and responsibility. However, that authority must be exercised wisely and in consultation with those who have experience and expertise in their respective areas." "Like Captain Thornfield?" Isabella asked, her voice dripping with skepticism. "Exactly like Captain Thornfield," Edmund confirmed. "Marcus has forgotten more about palace security than most people will ever know. His insights are invaluable, and his loyalty to this family is absolute." Isabella stood abruptly, her purple gown rustling with the sharp movement. "I understand perfectly, Edmund. The word of a guard captain carries more weight than the concerns of your wife. Perhaps I should simply content myself with ceremonial duties and leave all important decisions to those who were here before me." Edmund rose as well, reaching out to take her hand, but Isabella stepped back, her green eyes flashing with hurt and anger. "Isabella, please. That's not what I meant, and you know it. I value your input enormously, but we must approach changes thoughtfully, especially when they involve security." "Thoughtfully," Isabella repeated, her voice bitter. "Or perhaps the truth is that you don't trust my judgment because I'm not Lydia, because I didn't grow up in this palace and don't share her saintly reputation among the staff." The mention of his late wife hit Edmund like a physical blow. He had tried to avoid comparisons between Isabella and Lydia, knowing how painful they were for his new wife, but the ghost of his first queen seemed to haunt every discussion about palace affairs. "This has nothing to do with Lydia," he said quietly, though they both knew that wasn't entirely true. "It has to do with maintaining the security and stability that protects not just us, but the entire realm." Isabella laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "Everything in this palace has to do with Lydia, Edmund. Her portrait hangs in the throne room, her favorite flowers still bloom in the gardens, and her precious guards continue to run palace security as if she might return at any moment." The silence that followed her outburst was heavy with unspoken truths and mutual hurt. Edmund realized that this confrontation went far deeper than questions about guard rotations or security protocols. Isabella's demands were symptoms of a larger struggle for acceptance and authority in a court that still mourned his beloved first wife. "Isabella," he said gently, "I know this is difficult. Coming into an established court is never easy, and I haven't done enough to help you find your place here. But undermining loyal servants and guards is not the answer. It will only create the very divisions and uncertainties you're trying to prevent." Isabella's anger began to transform into something more vulnerable. "I just want to feel like I belong here, Edmund. Like I'm more than just a replacement for someone everyone considered perfect. Every day I'm compared to her, found wanting and treated as if my opinions and concerns are somehow less valid because I didn't earn my place through tragic circumstances." Edmund moved closer, this time successfully taking her hands in his. "You're not a replacement, Isabella. You're my wife, my partner, and the Queen Consort. Those are roles that carry immense respect and authority. But that authority is most effective when it's exercised with wisdom and in collaboration with others." Even when those others make it clear they don't respect me? Isabella asked, thinking of Captain Thornfield's polite but firm resistance to her proposals. Especially then, Edmund replied. Respect is earned through actions, not demanded through position. Marcus and the others will come to value your contributions when they see that you value theirs. Isabella pulled her hands free, moving to the window that overlooked the palace courtyard. Below, she could see guards conducting their morning drills, their movements precise and coordinated. Captain Thornfield stood among them, offering quiet instruction and encouragement. The scene represented everything she felt excluded from, the easy camaraderie and mutual respect that came from shared experience and proven loyalty. What if they never accept me? She asked, her voice small. What if I'm always going to be the outsider who disrupted their comfortable arrangements? Edmund joined her at the window, following her gaze to the training guards below. Then you prove them wrong through your actions. Show them that you're committed to the same principles they are, the protection and prosperity of the realm. Work with them instead of against them. And if Captain Thornfield continues to resist the changes I believe are necessary? Edmund was quiet for a moment, watching as Marcus corrected a young guard's stance with patient professionalism. Then you present your concerns to me with specific examples and evidence, and we'll evaluate them together. But Isabella, I need you to trust my judgment about the people who have served this family loyally. They deserve that consideration. Isabella nodded slowly, though she wasn't entirely convinced. The conversation had not resolved her fundamental frustration with her position in the palace hierarchy, but it had clarified the boundaries within which she would have to operate. If she wanted to effect change, she would need to be more strategic and less confrontational. I suppose I should prepare for my meeting with Captain Thornfield, she said, her tone carefully neutral. Edmund turned to study her profile, noting the determined set of her jaw despite her apparent acquiescence. Isabella, promise me you'll approach this as a discussion rather than a confrontation. Marcus is a good man and he wants what's best for the royal family. If you give him a chance, I think you'll find he can be a valuable ally. Of course, Isabella replied, though her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. I'll be the picture of diplomatic cooperation. As Edmund prepared to leave for his morning appointments, he felt a lingering unease about the conversation. Isabella had agreed to his requests, but he knew his wife well enough to recognize when she was merely regrouping rather than genuinely conceding. The meeting between Isabella and Captain Thornfield would be crucial in determining whether this conflict could be resolved diplomatically or would escalate into something more serious. Meanwhile, in the guards' quarters, Marcus was conducting his own preparations for the upcoming confrontation. He had spent the early morning reviewing personnel files, security protocols, and precedents from previous reigns. If the Queen Consort wanted to challenge the Royal Guard's arrangements, he would be ready with facts, figures, and historical context to support every decision and protocol currently in place. Sergeant Elena Vasquez knocked on his door precisely at 8 o'clock, her uniform immaculate and her expression serious. At 38, Elena was one of the most respected members of the Royal Guard, having earned her position through exceptional skill and unwavering dedication. She was also one of the few guards who had served exclusively during Edmund's reign, having joined the Guard just months before Queen Lydia's death. Captain, she said as she entered, I've completed the review you requested. Here are the incident reports, efficiency metrics, and commendation records for the past 5 years. Marcus accepted the thick folder, grateful for Elena's thoroughness. Thank you, Sergeant. Your timing is perfect. I have a feeling this meeting with the Queen Consort will require concrete evidence to support our positions. Elena's expression remained professionally neutral, but Marcus could see the concern in her eyes. Sir, if I may ask, are there genuine security concerns that have been identified, or is this more about political considerations? It was a delicate question, one that touched on the growing tensions everyone in the palace could sense but few dared to discuss openly. Marcus considered his response carefully, knowing that his words would likely be shared with other guards who were equally concerned about their future. Sergeant, he said finally, our duty is to protect the royal family and maintain the security of the realm. That duty doesn't change regardless of the political currents that may flow around us. We serve the crown, and we serve it with honor and professionalism, regardless of the challenges we may face. Elena nodded, understanding the message behind his diplomatic language. The Royal Guard would maintain its standards and principles, even if those standards were being questioned by those they served. "Sir," she said, "the men and women under your command have complete confidence in your leadership. Whatever decisions need to be made, we'll support them." Marcus felt a surge of gratitude for the loyalty and trust his guard showed him, but he also felt the weight of responsibility that came with their confidence. The choices he made in the coming hours would affect not just his own career, but the lives and livelihoods of the dedicated professionals who served under him. As Elena departed, Marcus returned to his preparation, knowing that the next few hours would test everything he had learned about leadership, diplomacy, and service during his long career. The Queen Consort might hold the advantage of rank and political authority, but Marcus held the advantages of experience, preparation, and the unwavering support of his guards. The stage was set for a confrontation that would determine not just the future of the Royal Guard, but the balance of power within the palace itself. Neither Isabella nor Marcus was prepared to back down from their principles, and King Edmund's attempts at mediation had only highlighted the fundamental differences in their approaches to leadership and authority. The morning sun climbed higher in the sky, and across the palace, servants and guards went about their duties with the careful efficiency that marked life in the royal household. But beneath the surface of normalcy, tension simmered that would soon boil over into a confrontation that would shock everyone involved and forever change the dynamics of power within the walls of Ravencrest Palace. The ornate clock in Queen Consort Isabella's reception room chimed 10 times, marking the appointed hour for her second confrontation with Captain Marcus Thornfield. Isabella sat rigidly in her high-backed chair, having dismissed her ladies-in-waiting moments earlier to ensure complete privacy for what she anticipated would be a decisive conversation. She had spent the morning reviewing court protocols and consulting with her personal advisor, Lord Pemberton, who had encouraged her to take a firmer stance with the palace staff. The Queen Consort wore a gown of midnight blue silk, adorned with the royal insignia in golden thread, and the crown jewels glittered at her throat and wrists. Every detail of her appearance had been calculated to reinforce her authority and status. She had also arranged for Lord Pemberton to be present as a witness, positioning him discreetly behind an ornate screen where he could observe without being seen. When Captain Thornfield entered the room, Isabella was immediately struck by how composed he appeared. Unlike their previous meeting, where she had caught him somewhat off guard, today he carried himself with the calm confidence of a man who had prepared thoroughly for whatever challenges lay ahead. He wore his full-dress uniform, complete with the ceremonial sword that marked his rank, and carried a leather portfolio that she assumed contained documentation to support his positions. "Your Majesty," Marcus said, offering a precise military bow. "Thank you for granting me this audience." Isabella noted the subtle difference in his phrasing. He thanked her for granting the audience rather than responding to her summons, a small but significant assertion of his own dignity and status. She decided to address this immediately. "Captain Thornfield, I trust you have had time to consider the proposals I outlined yesterday regarding necessary reforms to the Royal Guard structure and protocols." Marcus remained standing at attention, his hands clasped behind his back. "Indeed I have, Your Majesty. I have also taken the liberty of preparing a comprehensive review of our current security arrangements, including performance metrics, incident reports, and historical precedents that may inform your decision-making process." He opened his portfolio and withdrew a thick document bound in royal blue leather. "With your permission, I would like to present this analysis for your consideration." Isabella felt a flash of irritation at his presumption. She had called this meeting to receive his compliance with her demands, not to review his documentation. However, she recognized that dismissing his preparation outright might appear unreasonable. "Very well, Captain. Please proceed, though I hope you understand that my primary concern is implementation of the changes I have outlined, not justification of current practices." Marcus opened the document with deliberate care, his movements precise and professional. "Your Majesty, I believe you will find that understanding our current practices is essential to evaluating proposed changes. May I begin with our security effectiveness record?" Instead, Marcus began to present a series of statistics that painted a compelling picture of the Royal Guard's performance. Over the past 5 years, they had prevented 17 security incidents, maintained a perfect record of protecting royal family members during public appearances, and earned commendations from international security organizations for their professionalism and effectiveness. Furthermore, Marcus continued, his voice gaining strength as he moved through his prepared material. Our current personnel structure reflects not just tradition, but careful optimization based on experience and proven competence. Each guard has undergone extensive background checks, continuous training, and regular performance evaluations. Isabella listened with growing frustration as Marcus methodically dismantled the foundation of her arguments. His presentation was masterful, combining hard data with subtle appeals to logic and fairness. She realized that he had anticipated her demands and prepared responses that made her proposals appear not just unnecessary but potentially harmful. "Captain," she interrupted, her voice sharp with authority, "while I appreciate your thoroughness, you seem to be missing the fundamental point. This is not a debate about the effectiveness of current arrangements. This is a directive from the Queen Consort regarding changes that will be implemented to ensure security arrangements align with current royal priorities." Marcus paused in his presentation, setting down the document and meeting her gaze directly. The respectful demeanor remained, but Isabella could see something harder in his eyes, a resolve that had not been there during their previous encounter. "Your Majesty," he said carefully, "I serve at the pleasure of the crown and follow all lawful orders. However, I also bear oath-bound responsibility for the safety and security of the royal family. Any orders that might compromise that security require careful evaluation and, if necessary, consultation with His Majesty the King." Isabella felt her blood pressure rise at what she perceived as a direct challenge to her authority. "Are you suggesting, Captain, that my instructions might be unlawful?" "Not unlawful, Your Majesty," Marcus replied, his tone remaining respectfully professional, "but potentially problematic from a security perspective. The changes you propose would introduce political considerations into personnel decisions, compromise established chains of command, and potentially undermine the trust and morale that are essential to effective protection." Behind the screen, Lord Pemberton leaned forward, recognizing the crucial moment in the confrontation. Isabella's response to this challenge would determine not just her relationship with the royal guard, but her credibility as a figure of authority within the palace. Isabella rose from her chair, her silk gown rustling ominously in the suddenly tense silence. "Captain Thornfield, I believe you have forgotten your position. You serve the crown, which means you serve me as Queen Consort. Your role is to implement my directives efficiently and without question, not to evaluate their merits or seek approval from other authorities." Marcus remained at attention, but his voice, when he responded, carried a quiet steel that resonated through the ornate room. "Your Majesty, with respect, my oath is to protect and serve the crown, the realm, and the people. That oath supersedes any individual directive, regardless of its source. I will not implement changes that I believe compromise the security of the royal family, even if ordered to do so by the Queen Consort herself." The silence that followed his declaration was deafening. Isabella stared at him in shock, unable to believe that a subordinate had just openly defied her direct order. In the span of those few seconds, she realized that this confrontation had escalated far beyond her initial intentions. "You refuse to follow my orders?" she asked, her voice deadly quiet. "I refuse to implement security changes that I believe are dangerous and unnecessary," Marcus clarified. "If Your Majesty wishes to proceed with these modifications, I respectfully request that you present your directives to His Majesty the King for his consideration and approval." Isabella felt something snap inside her at his continued resistance. All the frustrations of the past months, the constant comparisons to Queen Lydia, the polite but persistent resistance from palace staff, the feeling of being an outsider in her own home, crystallized into pure fury directed at the man standing before her. "How dare you!" she exploded, her carefully maintained composure shattering completely. "How dare you stand there and lecture me about my duties and responsibilities? I am the Queen Consort of this realm, and I will not be spoken to like a child by a common soldier." Marcus's expression didn't change, but Isabella could see that her words had struck home. "Your Majesty, I intended no disrespect. However, I cannot and will not compromise the security of the royal family for political considerations." "Political considerations?" Isabella's voice rose to near shouting levels. "You think this is about politics? This is about competence. This is about loyalty. This is about having guards who serve the current queen instead of worshipping at the shrine of a dead woman who can't protect anyone anymore. The moment the words left her mouth, Isabella knew she had made a catastrophic error. Marcus's face went white with shock and anger, and she could almost feel Lord Pemberton's horror from behind the screen. To speak disrespectfully of the beloved Queen Lydia was bad enough, but to do so in front of guards who had risked their lives for her was unforgivable. Marcus took a step forward, his military composure finally cracking. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice trembling with suppressed rage. Queen Lydia was beloved by the people and served this realm with honor and grace until her final breath. The guards under my command would gladly give their lives for any member of the royal family, including you, despite your obvious contempt for their service and sacrifice. Isabella realized she had crossed a line from which there might be no return, but her pride would not allow her to back down. "Captain Thornfield, you are relieved of your duties, effective immediately. Report to the palace administration for reassignment. I will not tolerate insubordination from anyone, regardless of their previous service record." Marcus straightened to his full height, his hand instinctively moving to rest on the pommel of his ceremonial sword. "Your Majesty, only His Majesty the King has the authority to remove the captain of the Royal Guard from his position. I serve at his pleasure, not at the whim of political appointees seeking to consolidate power." The insult was delivered with surgical precision, and Isabella felt it like a physical blow. Marcus had just called her a political appointee to her face, effectively denying her legitimacy as queen consort. The confrontation had moved far beyond questions of security protocols into fundamental challenges of authority and respect. "Guards," Isabella called, her voice carrying clearly through the palace corridors. "Attend your queen." Within moments, 2 guards appeared in the doorway, their faces showing confusion and concern at being summoned to what appeared to be a confrontation between their queen and their captain. Isabella could see the conflict in their expressions as they tried to understand what was expected of them. "Escort Captain Thornfield from the palace grounds," Isabella commanded, her voice shaking with rage and humiliation. "He is no longer welcome in royal quarters." The guards looked uncertainly between Isabella and Marcus, clearly uncomfortable with the situation they had been thrust into. Marcus, recognizing their dilemma, stepped forward to address them directly. "Gentlemen," he said quietly, "you have sworn oaths to protect the royal family and maintain the honor of your service. I suggest you remember those oaths carefully before taking any action you might later regret." One of the guards, a veteran named Corporal Davies, who had served under Marcus for over a decade, cleared his throat nervously. "Your Majesty," he said carefully, "with respect, Captain Thornfield is our commanding officer. We cannot take action against him without direct orders from His Majesty the King." Isabella stared at the guard in disbelief. Even her direct command to the Royal Guard was being questioned and effectively refused. The very foundation of her authority was crumbling before her eyes. "Are you refusing my direct order, Corporal?" she asked, her voice dangerous. Corporal Davies shifted uncomfortably but held his ground. "Your Majesty, our chain of command is clear. We report to Captain Thornfield, who reports to His Majesty. Without the King's direct authorization, we cannot remove our commanding officer." Isabella realized that she had been outmaneuvered completely. Marcus had not only refused her orders but had effectively demonstrated that the guard's loyalty lay with him rather than with her. Her attempt to assert authority had instead highlighted her lack of real power within the palace hierarchy. "Then summon His Majesty immediately," she demanded. "We will resolve this matter once and for all." Marcus inclined his head respectfully. "Your Majesty, I believe that would be wise. His Majesty should be informed of this situation and allowed to make the necessary decisions regarding palace security and personnel." As Corporal Davies departed to fetch the king, an uncomfortable silence settled over the room. Isabella remained standing, her face flushed with anger and embarrassment, while Marcus maintained his position at attention. The other guard stood awkwardly by the door, clearly wishing he could be anywhere else. Lord Pemberton emerged from behind the screen, his face pale with concern. "Your Majesty," he said quietly, "perhaps it would be wise to consider how to present this situation to His Majesty in the most favorable light." Isabella turned on him sharply. Are you suggesting I have acted improperly, Lord Pemberton? Not at all, Your Majesty, Pemberton replied smoothly, though his nervousness was evident. I merely suggest that the king might better understand your position if the matter were presented as a security concern rather than a personal conflict. Marcus spoke for the first time since the guard's arrival. Your Majesty, Lord Pemberton offers wise counsel. His Majesty will need to understand all aspects of this situation to make informed decisions. Isabella felt trapped between her anger at Marcus's continued defiance and her growing realization that she had handled this confrontation badly. Her attempt to demonstrate authority had instead shown its limits, and she feared that King Edmund's reaction might not support her position as strongly as she hoped. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the corridor, and within moments King Edmund entered the room, his expression grave and concerned. He took in the scene quickly. Isabella standing rigidly in the center of the room, Marcus at attention, the uncomfortable guard by the door, and Lord Pemberton hovering nervously near the window. "What is the meaning of this?" Edmund asked, his voice carrying the authority of his crown. Corporal Davies indicated there was an urgent matter requiring my immediate attention. Isabella stepped forward, determined to present her version of events first. "Edmund, I have been forced to relieve Captain Thornfield of his duties due to his continued insubordination and refusal to implement necessary security reforms. He has openly defied my direct orders and questioned my authority as Queen Consort." Edmund's gaze moved to Marcus, who remained silent and at attention. "Captain, what is your account of these events?" Marcus chose his words carefully, knowing that his future and that of his guards hung in the balance. "Your Majesty, I have expressed concerns about proposed changes to security protocols that I believe could compromise the safety of the royal family. When Her Majesty insisted that these changes be implemented without consultation or evaluation, I respectfully requested that the matter be brought to your attention for consideration." Edmund looked back and forth between his wife and his captain of guards, beginning to understand the depth of the conflict that had erupted in his absence. "Isabella, what specific changes were you proposing?" Isabella felt suddenly defensive as she realized she would have to justify her demands to Edmund in front of Marcus and the witnesses. "I requested new guard rotations, revised access protocols, and a review of personnel to ensure optimal security arrangements." "And Captain Thornfield objected to these proposals?" Edmund asked. "He refused to implement them," Isabella said, her voice rising again. "He questioned my authority and insisted that you approve any changes. When I pressed the matter, he became increasingly insubordinate, culminating in his outright defiance of my direct orders." Edmund was silent for a long moment, considering the implications of what he was hearing. He understood that this confrontation represented far more than a disagreement about security protocols. It was a fundamental test of authority within his palace and his family. "Captain Thornfield," he said finally, "do you refuse to follow the Queen Consort's orders?" Marcus met the king's gaze steadily. "Your Majesty, I follow all lawful orders that do not compromise my sworn duty to protect the royal family. In this instance, I believe the proposed changes could undermine security effectiveness, and I respectfully requested guidance from the ultimate authority on palace security, yourself." Edmund nodded slowly, then turned to Isabella. "My dear, these are indeed significant changes you are proposing. Captain Thornfield's request for consultation seems reasonable given the potential implications for our safety." Isabella felt her heart sink as she realized that Edmund was not supporting her position. "So his insubordination is acceptable because you agree with his concerns?" "This is not about agreement," Edmund replied firmly. "This is about following proper procedures for matters that affect the security of the realm. Major changes to guard protocols require careful consideration and royal approval." Isabella stared at her husband in disbelief. "And what about my authority as Queen Consort? What about my right to ensure our protection meets my standards?" Edmund's expression softened with sympathy, but his voice remained firm. "Your concerns are valid and will be given full consideration. However, they must be addressed through proper channels and with appropriate consultation. Captain Thornfield has served this family faithfully for 20 years. His judgment in security matters carries significant weight." Isabella felt the last of her composure crumble as she realized that she had not only failed to assert her authority, but had publicly demonstrated its limits. In trying to force the issue, she had instead highlighted her outsider status and lack of real power within the palace structure. I see, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. So the word of a guard captain supersedes the wishes of the queen consort. I understand perfectly. Edmund stepped toward her, reaching out in concern, but Isabella moved away from his touch. Isabella, that's not what this is about. Your position carries enormous authority and respect. But that authority works best when it's exercised in collaboration with experienced advisors. Isabella turned to face the room, looking at Marcus, who maintained his respectful attention, at Lord Pemberton, who avoided her gaze, and at the guard by the door, who stared straight ahead with military precision. She realized that everyone in the room had witnessed her humiliation and defeat. Captain Thornfield, Edmund said, you will prepare a detailed analysis of the Queen Consort's proposals for my review. I want specific recommendations regarding any modifications that might enhance our security while addressing Her Majesty's concerns. Of course, Your Majesty, Marcus replied. I will have a comprehensive report ready for your review within 2 days. Edmund turned back to Isabella, his expression gentle but firm. Isabella, I hope you understand that this outcome reflects no criticism of your judgment or authority. Palace security is a complex matter that requires careful consideration and consultation. Isabella nodded stiffly, though her eyes blazed with unspoken fury. Of course, Edmund, I understand completely. As the meeting disbanded and the various participants departed, Isabella remained in the room with Lord Pemberton, staring out the window at the palace grounds where guards continued their duties as if nothing had changed. In reality, everything had changed. Her attempt to assert authority had instead revealed its limitations, and her relationship with the palace staff, already strained, had been damaged perhaps beyond repair. The news of the confrontation spread quickly through the palace, carried by servants' whispers and guards' conversations. Within hours, everyone from the lowest scullery maid to the highest nobles knew that Queen Consort Isabella had attempted to remove Captain Thornfield and had been overruled by the king himself. For Marcus, the victory was bittersweet. He had successfully defended his position and the integrity of the royal guard, but he knew that his relationship with the Queen Consort was now irreparably damaged. Future interactions would be marked by tension and mistrust, making his job more difficult and the palace atmosphere more strained. King Edmund found himself in the most difficult position of all. His attempt to balance loyalty to long-serving staff with support for his wife had satisfied no one completely. Isabella felt betrayed and humiliated, while Marcus, despite his victory, faced the prospect of working with a queen consort who viewed him as an enemy. The confrontation had ended, but its consequences would echo through the halls of Ravencrest Palace for months to come. Authority had been tested, relationships had been strained, and the delicate balance of power within the royal household had been forever altered. Queen Consort Isabella had learned a harsh lesson about the limits of her position, while Captain Marcus Thornfield had demonstrated that loyalty, competence, and institutional respect could triumph over political maneuvering. In the end, the palace would continue to function, the royal guard would maintain its traditions and effectiveness, and the crown would endure as it had for centuries. But the human cost of the confrontation in damaged relationships, lost trust, and wounded pride, would linger long after the immediate crisis had passed.